What's up guys, Ruppy here, welcoming you to the draft analysis for my Columbus Swoo as we take a shot at the second season of the Breedjects Battle Royale. I'm going to be upfront with you guys for a moment before we really get into this. I'm at a point right now I never thought I would be, just by being invited to this league, and I do feel very honored by it. It might sound a bit weird, but considering some of the talent in this league is a lot of PokeTubers that I have been watching for a very long time, I actually feel honored to be here. I have been playing draft format for a long time. I've been trying to work my way up, trying to make a stable thing out of YouTube on and off for many years. Being accepted to this league is a great personal honor to me because it feels... I feel a sense of personal validation in some respect that I've finally made it, and now I'm getting a chance to see if I can hang. And that's all I really could have asked for, is a chance. So thank you so very much to the BBR for allowing me to take my best shot, and we're going to see how well this goes. My Columbus Swoo are looking forward to this season. We have been working hard since the draft ended to try to get everything ready for week 1. We will see how it works out when we get to that point. But let me go ahead and introduce you to the team, shall we? We're going to start off with my very first draft pick, which was Willowboom. Now, another league I finished recently called the League of Extraordinary Trainers. I did finish the season with a Willowboom on my roster. I did not start with it. I picked it up mid-season. In that league, Willowboom was not allowed to have Grassy Surge because it wasn't legally released yet. We were trying to keep things as legal as possible. But it is legally available now, and you better believe I want the chance to try Grassy Surge Willowboom out. Grassy terrain is honestly probably one of my favorite terrains. Willowboom itself is a very powerful physical attacker. It's got good defenses as well. Obviously, the grassy terrain is going to make it so much better, especially since it also has access to the new Grass Tutor move from the Isle of Armor DLC, Grassy Glide, which, while weaker in power than other options like Drum Beating and especially Woodhammer, Grassy Glide is guaranteed priority on the terrain that Willowboom can set for itself, which, that speaks to me right out of the gate that Willowboom is capable of doing all these things now because of what the DLC gave it. Also, base 85 speed is not a bad speed tier, not gonna lie. It's not too fast, but it's good for being able to put it in a position where it can threaten a lot of the bulkier things that might try to stand in my way. For my second round pick, I had to do it. I apologize, but I had to do it. If you're gonna let me have Willowboom, if I'm gonna draft Willowboom, and you're gonna leave it on the board for me, I had to take Hallucin. Everyone knows what Hallucin is capable of by now, I would like to think. Considering the Unburden ability makes this stupidly fast bird even faster, to the point where this thing is near impossible to outspeed half the time. It's got good attack, obviously it's got Sword Stance to boost that, access to moves such as Acrobatics, which doubles in power when it loses its item, which triggers Unburden. It got close combat this generation too, so it doesn't need to rely on high jump kick anymore, which is dangerous in and of itself. Hallucin and Willowboom actually pair really nicely with one another, even outside of terrain shenanigans. They do share a flying weakness, but I will address that momentarily. But they watch each other's backs fairly well, they set one another up pretty nicely, and dare I say, I'm sorry again, I had to do it. You left Hallucin on the board, I was allowed to grab Willowboom. You had to know this was coming. But speaking of that aforementioned flying weakness that I mentioned, that is where my third pick comes into play to fix that. I decided to grab Magnazone, who was allowed back in through the Isle of Armor DLC. No Galarian border is going to stop this floating magnet train. It's got great special attack, it's got good defenses in its own right. Obviously, it meshes really well with Lucha because it eats flying hits all day. It covers its electric weakness as well, as does Willowboom, but Magnazone does. Magnazone covers both of Lucha's weaknesses. It has Magna Pull, which will allow me to trap Steel types. Granted, It's not as good to some degree because Magnazone no longer has Hidden Power Fire to abuse because Hidden Power is no more. One of the few times I actually can't believe I'm saying that I'm gonna miss Hidden Power. But we're just talking straight Steel types, Magnazone can still hit them really hard because there are not too many out there that have good special defense, and Magnazone can abuse that. So anything I can weaken in that regard will certainly help. In addition, Grassy Terrain from Willowboom basically covers Magnazone's quad weakness to ground, which certainly makes this thing a lot more threatening than you might think right out of the gate. Also, Magnazone can pivot around with Volt Switch, which is always appreciated in my hand, being able to abuse Volt Turn to gain momentum at a moment's notice. Now, at this point, I started to realize that, well, my team's certainly starting to come together. I've got a bit of a fire hazard going on here, with Magnazone and Willowboom both having fire weaknesses, and that's not something Hallucin can necessarily help with. So, to fix that little issue, I grabbed another Mon that actually does quite good work when you put Grassy Terrain into the equation, that being Tyranitar. Ttar is not a Mon I've actually used very often, believe it or not. Maybe it's just the fact that I'm not as attuned to sand or anything like that, but Ttar definitely works really well with what I've got so far. It's a rock setter, it can D-dance if I want to go more offensive. Sandstream is actually not as much of a burden on my team as you might think, because of Rillaboom's Grassy Surge, giving me terrain to basically offset with the terrain healing me, it offsets the damage that my own mons would take from Sandstream, which is certainly nice. Granted, my opponent can also take advantage of that, but it works better on me with the bulk I do have to be able to put additional pressure on opponents given the situation. Also, you can't discount Ttar's defenses, especially since as a rock type, it gets a Spadef buff from sand. It's a great physical attacker as well. You do not want to be taking stone edges from this thing half the time. Ttar's got a lot going for it with this team, and I'm really happy with this pick and excited to get the chance to actually use Ttar for a change. Going into round 5, I decided to grab something that was a little familiar to me. Anyone who has watched my IBL run will certainly remember this Mon, though perhaps not in the exact same form. For my 5th pick, I grabbed Hatterene. This thing, in its Gmax form, was a godsend to my IBL draft, and I think it actually works really nicely here as well. It's got good defenses, it's a great special attacker, it has some really good coverage options, especially since, say, things like Giga Drain would be getting a boost from the Grassy Terrain. The biggest draw, of course, being Magic Bounce, which keeps hazards off my side of the field if I play that card correctly. And Trick Room, which gives me some speed coverage, so if Hallucin's not as much of a problem already because of how stupidly fast it is, now I've got a response on the other end of the speed spectrum that you need to be concerned with. Because there are very few things, if any, in the current meta that outslow Hatterene. So letting this thing be behind a Trick Room is a potential disaster waiting to happen. Moving on, my next pick is going to be Tentacruel. Tentacruel is another one of those mons that I haven't really used a whole lot, even though I do like what it has to offer. Obviously, again, going back to something I mentioned with Magnazone, and it also applies to Ttar as well. Ground weakness is kind of nullified a bit here because of the Grassy Terrain, which this mon being able to heal from that in Black Sludge is actually kind of nasty, not gonna lie. It is a phenomenal special wall. It actually sits at a base 100 speed tier, which I think a lot of people tend to forget about sometimes because Tentacruel is more prominently used as a wall. But it is actually quite fast and can abuse its speed if necessary. Obviously, it gets rapid spin, so this is much needed hazard removal for me. Toxic spikes are also nice that this thing can set to help hazard stack with the rocks I've got. Tentacruel has a lot going for it, and I think it's going to benefit from being on this roster. For my next pick, this was a bit interesting, but this is actually, I think, going to work out. With my next pick, I ended up grabbing Rabboot. Now, anyone who saw my IBL run might remember me grabbing Willowboom, and for as good as it sounded on paper, it didn't quite put in the work that I was hoping for, though it still won the award for cutest Pokemon on my team. I mean, it was a Babymon, it's adorable. Rabboot's not quite a Babymon, but it's definitely got some nasty uses. Base 94 is actually a really solid speed tier. It's pretty funky. It's not quite base 100, but it is above base 90, which puts this thing in a really interesting class to be able to work around any opposing speed tiers. Because it is not a fully evolved mon, it is capable of running Eviolite. It has some really solid coverage, and obviously with grassy terrain, any coverage that results in potential recoil can be healed off. One big thing to note about Rabboot, however, unlike its older brother Cinderace, where it's banned for obvious reasons, because Libero Cinderace is a nasty piece of work, Libero is allowed with Rabboot. And I fully intend to take advantage of this, because Rabboot can certainly do some good things here. There are some things it's missing out on that Cinderace has that it doesn't, but I think Rabboot still has a lot going for it, that it can reliably abuse Libero to make this work. Going into the 8th round, I realized that I was actually still kind of lacking a dragon. I have my Firewater Grass Core now with Rabboot and Willowboom and Tentacruel. One of those things is not like the other. And I've got a Fairy Steel thing going on with Magnazone and Hatterene, but I still need a dragon. And I also wouldn't have minded more things that are capable of setting rocks as well, so I don't have to fully rely on Ttar for that. So, what gives me the best of both worlds in that situation? Why, Droidagon, of course. Droidagon is a mon I haven't used in a very long time, but it is a mon that I have loved being able to use whenever I've needed a lower point dragon type that still has a lot going for it. It has really solid defenses on both ends of the spectrum. It is a very powerful physical attacker that I think a lot of people tend to forget about sometimes because it makes for such a solid wall. Not to mention it has really great abilities between Mold Breaker, Rough Skin, and Sheer Force. There is a lot going on there that makes Droidagon a little hard to figure out at times. It is a bit on the slower end of things as well, which means it is capable of abusing Hatterene's Trick Room if need be. Droidagon is able to set up Stealth Rocks. It can cause status with things like Glare, which paralysis against this team is definitely not something you want to be experiencing. It also has Roar and Dragon Tail to be able to phase to take more advantage of those rocks. It's got some fairly solid coverage too, so it's good to have Droidagon back. I am looking forward to using this mon again. When we got into round 9 and I was starting to run low on points, I realized something. As solid as this team is, it's lacking something. Something that, for whatever reason, I tend to forego and usually end up getting scolded for it at a later point in time somewhere. This team needs a ground type. And while I was looking over my options, something got brought up to me that I could not resist. So for my round 9 pick, I did grab a ground type, and the ground type in question is Marowak. Not Alolan Marowak, Cantonian Marowak. It is actually a really solid ground type. It's got good defenses and really good fairly good attack, which being able to abuse the Thick Club item makes this thing even stronger, which is nasty. It can set rocks. It's got quite a bit going for it, especially being a lure to electric types, especially since it does have the Lightning Rod ability. The one big thing that I want to note about Marowak, however, you might think, okay, he's got a ground type, but won't grassy terrain be a problem? Not quite the case with Marowak, because yes, it can use Earthquake, which unfortunately does get nerfed by grassy terrain, but Bone Meringue does not. Marowak's signature move is actually a godsend to this team because it provides me a reliable ground-type move that hits twice, and is also, considering when you boost it up with Thick Club, Marowak is able to take advantage of grassy terrain without being hindered by it. So I think this is a really solid late ground-type pick for me. Now, heading into the last round, I ran into a bit of an issue. There was another mon I was looking at for this pick. It went by the name of Stoutland, because I didn't have a normal type, and the fact that Stoutland got Sand Rush was also really nice to give me something to actually abuse Ttar Sand. However, Stoutland got sniped from me at the very last second by my good pal Platinum Howler, and while he did apologize for it, I let it go because at this point I'm like, okay, this has gotta be a sign. Because there was a mon he was trying to convince me to draft throughout the entire thing. And at this point I'm like, alright, you win, I will take it. But I'm actually not that sad about what I did end up with, which happens to be Clawitzer. This actually kind of works out for me. Yes, it is a second water type, and Clawitzer is kind of on the slower side a bit, which, to be fair, it allows it to abuse Trick Room if need be as well. But Clawitzer has great special attacks. Its signature ability, Mega Launcher, which I believe is the only one that actually has it now since Mega Blastoise is no longer a thing, allows its Aura and Pulse moves to be a lot stronger, which takes full advantage of its great special attack, and considering the new move Terrain Pulse that got introduced with the Isle of Armor DLC, not only is that getting a Mega Launcher boost, because it adapts the type of whatever terrain it's used on, this effectively gives Clawitzer grass coverage now, as long as my grassy terrain is active. Which means water types are not necessarily a wall to Clawitzer anymore. Which, I will certainly take that all day. If anything allows this big clawed crustacean to actually start tearing holes in teams, I will take it. So that is going to round out the team. I apologize if this draft analysis sounded a bit disjointed. Sitting here and just talking without having anything to react to is not necessarily a strength of mine. I will be upfront about that. That's why sometimes my draft analysis and even some of my team builders might sound a bit awkward. But I did my best to try to justify why I grabbed everything, and I think this team is looking really solid. Honestly, I'm really liking this draft. I tend to struggle a bit with drafting, but this draft turned out really solid, and I am really excited to use this team. So, I hope you guys enjoyed watching this. Thank you so very much for watching if you did decide to check this out. I have been Ruppy, and my Columbus Swoo and I will see you guys soon when we begin our BBR journey. Take care.